right. I should say, hey. I'm feeling, today I'm going to get my inner Dwayne Wayne going. Hey, how are you? I'm with Suraj Patel, coming at you from the AAHOA floor at the conference. A little bit of a bonus episode today because, the event's been so good for the last 2 days, but I didn't have a chance to get on Mr. Suraj Patel, who's with me, who happens to be running for Congress in New York City. Hey, Suraj, welcome to the show.
I'm doing great. How are you?
It is so much fun to have you here. I got to tell you, I really respect what you're doing, trying to affect change, but what I really want to start with is it makes me curious to know, you're part of the AAHOA community. What was it like growing up in the AAHOA community, and how did it position you to want to take on Capitol Hill?
Look, this community has been like a family to me.
Right.
And one of the most remarkable things about politics, generally speaking, in American history, has been that when an ethnic group has one of its own sort of breaking through the barriers to get representation,
right,
it bands together collectively and supports that person. And has for Irish and has for everyone else. And incidentally, just a fun anecdote. So just last week,
right,
my opponent goes off the cuff in an interview with BuzzFeed and says something like, my opponent's raising a lot of money, but all of it is so much of it is from people with the last name Patel,
right,
which is his last name. And so it's all his family. And I'm like, wow.
Right.
That's how out of touch we are here.
Okay.
That we don't know that there are 300,000 Patels in the United States and we're not all related.
How could you not know that one simple fact?
It's shocking. It's shocking. But it's really funny, and it's done a good job to galvanize this community even more.
Right.
To have, and there's nothing wrong with that, to have one of their own in office. Now, both sides of this community I aim to represent. One, as a first-generation American, as an Indian American, as a proud speaker of Gujarati and Hindi and English and Spanish and all those things. This country's future is non-binary. This country's future is what my generation and I represent, which is shutting down those labels of the past. So that's one. And this community has been instrumental in helping me get at least on the platform, on the stage, through financial support, through introductions and everything else. On the other side, I am also a small business owner. We built a company from when I was 5 years old to today. With our own family reinvested money, much like so many of your listeners and much like so many members of this community, living in our motels, doing the laundry, filling the vending machines, sweeping the parking lots, installing door locks in our hotels, all those things that we did growing up. Taking that hard work ethic combined with the knowledge that business need not be any less progressive than labor, that government and business need not always be an antagonistic relationship. That if we can send people with backgrounds that are varied and not just career politicians time and time again, perhaps we break the fever in this city, in Washington, and actually start tackling our biggest problems.
Yeah, I think that's... You make it seem so simple, but it doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be an easy thing. I feel like over the last couple of decades, we've become so polarized that you've got a D because you're running for an office on the Democratic side, right? And the folks on the R are just because you have that D are willing to shut you down. And to be fair, I see a lot of it going the opposite way as well. There's not enough listening. There's too much entrenching in positions, and almost when somebody brings up an opposing point of view, people have the tendency to dig in even deeper and not hear what people are saying. How can you break through all of that to get folks to say, hey, you know what? We can meet in the middle. We can be reasonable. We can find success together.
I think that one thing we really need is a brand new set of people in Congress, period. That the people that are battle-scarred with the last 30 years of increasingly narrow ideological battles of left-right, there's too much of this feeling that that everything in this country is a zero-sum game.
Right.
In politics, everyone seems to think that everything's a zero-sum game, that if I win, you lose, and you win, I lose. The president does that right now.
Right.
And that is not a healthy or tenable way to govern a country, and that is actually not an accurate way to look at the world. Most of us grow out of that probably around 7 or 8 years old after we've interacted with each other in a playground. The president has Arrested Development and never made it past that point.
Not good for a president, great for a TV series.
That's exactly right. It makes for good series, good ratings, and that's working. In any case, new people. You can't change the system from people who are from within the system, who are creatures and created that system. So
Well, I want to explore that for 1 second because that's interesting because you get inculcated into this Washington, D.C. bubble, right? And you start to get that group think to them.
Sure.
And then, of course, you're pulled into your sides. And because the senior leadership says you have to think this way, you have to get behind us on this. So you're right. There is a negative caustic energy created by people that have been in the job as career-minded people, as opposed to my opinion of what the founding fathers believed was go, serve, go back to your farm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is unrealistic to feel like we can have part-time sort of Congress people, but I don't believe, I'm a firm supporter of term limits. I don't believe anybody should be in the same job for 25 years, having not been promoted and not find a different career.
Right. I mean, you look at CEOs, they last 10 years on average with the ability to be effective because at some point reality catches up and you can't make any more forward progress. It's important to shake it up. It's important to make change. And I guess you're feeling the same way when it comes to congressional representatives, that they shouldn't be there 30, 40 years.
No, absolutely not. Especially if there's not any upward trajectory in your productivity on anything. And so I think that's something that we are looking at. But look, we're not going to solve our problems by fighting them on the left-right axis. Right, that we have dug in too far on that single axis. That things are, liberals or conservatives, and this is how we tackle these problems. And there's only two options. There are a multitude of ways to cross aisles. There are a multitude of ways to bring people together that focus on elevating people all together. Let me give you an example.
Yeah, great.
Okay, I'm a Democrat. My goal in healthcare is to make sure that every single American in this country has of access to and has affordable health care for all, Medicare for all. And I believe that there is, that Republicans ostensibly want to lower costs.
Right.
Now, those are not two things in opposition. If you lower costs, then more people can afford health care.
Right. I've always thought there's been a lot of government waste that could probably be logically addressed that'll free up money in order to take care of people.
Yeah, and we could tee up some market reforms that accomplish both things. A simple example. In every single product you buy in America, there's price transparency.
Right.
You go to, a store or a place or whatever, and you see the price of something, and you compare it to the others, and then you shop and you leave. In healthcare, we have opacity in pricing. That is after you get an MRI or you get a set of tests or whatever, that 6 weeks later you get the $60,000 bill and your insurance pays for it and you move on.
Right.
Well, that price transparency in healthcare, if you added it, if you could shop your MRI around from the get-go, or you thought to yourself, you know what, maybe I don't need this. I know my wrist is fractured or whatever, right? Unnecessary tests and all that. Then you would start to lower the cost of healthcare because you'd let the consumer, the person consuming it, without lowering the level of services, be able to at least add an element of competition in. Why does that not happen?
I say that there's two issues that are at stake here that we have to consider. Number one, on the customer side, because they're paying for insurance, they don't look at the bills. They don't think about the bills. $60,000, $20,000 doesn't matter to them at all, right? And then on the other side, you have the the big system that's been put in place that doesn't give you the opportunity to shop around to really understand what the pricing is. So the consumer, even if they want to get educated on it, can't. So there's no motivation for the consumer to get educated. There's no motivation for the big health companies to educate the consumers, because then kind of the jig will be up.
Yeah, I mean, look, there would be motivation. It's a very simple fix. There's a motivation for anyone to save money.
Right.
It doesn't even matter if it's for somebody else. The vast majority of people would be like, all right, let me make sure that I find the right place. And especially if you shared the savings, a 10% savings share, and you would still do it, right?
Right.
The issue is the corrosive influence of money in politics.
Right.
You hit the nail on the head. The reason there's no price transparency in healthcare is because too many players in the system, whether that's hospital systems and doctors groups and whatever, benefit from the idea that we blindly spend on tests and things like that. So we not only do we need to make sure that every single person has access to healthcare, we dramatically need to re-envision the way that we deliver health services in this country. That we we focus on outcomes and not tests,
Right.
and things like that. So there's a lot of things we can do. These do not fall on the left-right axis.
Right.
Both, and they accomplish both goals. You lower cost, and therefore more people can afford.
Right. I think that's why I consider myself a moderate. I'm not in a political party, because I see ideas that are good. I'm both sides, and I'm told are the only two sides available to me, and then I see some horrible ideas, right? On both sides. I'm not a guy of extremes. I'm a guy in the middle. What you're saying makes a lot of sense to me. You address the root cause of the problem and address that. But we have a big problem in society, Suraj, where I don't think people look to actually address the real cause of issues. It's all about Band-Aids as opposed to
I
cures.
always say that, right? I think that our first podcast I said that. I was like, look, one of my biggest problems with American politics is that when given the opportunity to examine and fix a problem at a structural level, we always choose not to.
Right.
That for whatever reason, we are so consumed with fixing symptoms of problems that we do not fix the underlying cause of said problems. And that's because of election cycles being 2 years long, because everyone's focused on simply bringing home as much as you can and making whatever press release and photo op type accomplishment as you can. And therefore, the 20-year horizon problems, climate change, healthcare reform, mass incarceration, immigration reform, get left on the wayside time and time again. We're solving the same problems we've been solving since 1980,
Right.
with no discernible progress in so many of them.
Right. That's I mean, for me as as a citizen, that really frustrates me. I find time and time again that no matter what officials go to Congress, they're just letting me down. And I find that very frustrating, because you see Mr. Smith goes to Washington. You see all these films that make you feel good about America and what our political system is about, but then it just doesn't seem to come through for the average person.
That's right, Glenn, and we will change that on June 26th.
Yeah, great. And that, of course, is the primary in New York, I'm wishing you a lot of luck in that. But I want, back to the AAHOA community, it must be interesting for you, because in my observation, I haven't taken any polls. I haven't seen any numbers, but it seems to me there's a lot more folks that wear red ties in this organization than blue ties, which kind of puts you as a little bit of an outlier. How does that work within your community and finding support in order for you to achieve your goals to be elected come November?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. This organization skews heavily Republican in its voting and outlook, But look, I think to me, that's short-sighted. I think that many of us are in this communities in this country because of immigration policies put in place by the progressive side of this country. And that's something I continually say. In order to gain a little bit of tax savings or regulatory savings, if you're willing to put upon your children a massive amount of debt, then that's a trade-off I'm not willing to make.
Right.
And one issue that really plagues this community and marginalized and ethnic communities across the country right now, most of us are first-generation Americans in this community.
Right.
That this president wants to reduce immigration levels to 1920s levels. It wants to take us backwards to a system that would not even allow. My great uncle moved to the United States in 1960. Called his brother over in 4 years later. Called his wife over. They both called their wives over 4 years later. And then my dad, and one by one, my family. Such that in 1983, I was born here in Mississippi. I am the end of a long line of chain migrants,
right?
As we're derisively called now, otherwise known as a family.
Right.
And I refuse to believe that even this community, for extra, dollar or whatever in tax savings, is willing to give up something that fundamentally makes America significantly different from every other country in the world, which is that family reunification and migration is what built this country. We're not importing factors of production. We're not importing people with skills and labor to grow our economy. We're importing families.
Right.
We're importing future Americans.
Right.
And we are part and parcel of the fabric of this country in the same amounts as anybody else. And that's something I'm fighting for every single day. And it's an argument I make to this community that right now you need fighters for people who look like you. You need fighters, people with your backgrounds, and one way to do that is to get representation, to show that we are here, we're not going anywhere, and we deserve to be part of the leadership of this country just as much as anybody else.
Yeah, I find the great strides that the Indian American community has taken over the last 40 years has been absolutely stunning and phenomenal to me, right? I remember back when there was a lot more outward racism towards the Indian American community. I remember, like you would have that Indian doctor and it'd be such a weird thing, but now the community's managed to turn it around. It's like, I'd much rather have that Indian doctor.
And there's an interesting So Patel became the most common surname to graduate from a med school, I think, last year. I just read this on Wikipedia because I had to start.
Yeah, but to be fair, it's only one family.
Exactly. I had to start educating myself on this on the Patel thing here, and I almost think that there's an interesting thing that happens right now with career politicians, with folks like that they're plenty satisfied with our community being doctors and lawyers and professionals and business people, and they're plenty satisfied to receive our checks. But when we encroach upon the territory of politics and leadership and those kinds of things, there's a whole, oh no, what's going on? You're supposed to be a doctor, that kind of thing. So this is where I think we are at in needing to break through. The other thing that I do think is, we are not a monolithic community. The South Asian community, counting Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Sri Lankans, Indians, and Nepalese people, we have significant amounts of our community living in poverty. Significant numbers of people,
Do you mean here in the United States?
In the United States, okay. Yeah. That some of the hardest working New Yorkers, for example, that work, that drive your taxis, that do all these things, are some of the hardest working people whose livelihoods are being disrupted by innovation in some cases. And the talk of, Indians and other Asian Americans being some sort of quote unquote model minority or whatever is offensive to the idea that we're not a monolith, but also that we can't leave people behind simply because others that look like them are successful. So
I feel like there's a lot of people being left behind right now.
Totally.
And to be fair, this is not an opinion. This is a fact. There's a biggest disparity of income, wealth in our country today. The last time it was like this was just before the Great Depression hit. So that's kind of a scary thing to me. How do you go into this trying to say, hey, we want to make sure we lift these people up, but it doesn't have to be at the expense of bringing these people down? Because I think that the people at the top are so concerned about protecting what they have that sometimes it comes off in we can't help them, which I don't think morally is really what they're looking for. They're just really trying to protect themselves.
So inequality is much in the other stuff we just talked about. Inequality is a symptom of a number of root causes. And so if you want to solve inequality, you don't just solve it by solving that. You solve the drivers of inequality. Currently, the biggest 4 drivers of inequality are an education system that costs so much. You cannot tell an entire generation of Americans that to be competitive in the global economy, you need college or something equivalent. And yet, if you want that, you're going to spend the first 20 years of your income earning life paying back that debt. And astronomical cost of education in this country
you can't renegotiate that debt.
And you can't renegotiate. So we need debt-free college. One of the other single biggest causes of inequality in this country is a taxation system that rewards wealth at far better amounts than work. That capital gains taxes are lower, that carried interest loopholes and stuff allow that, and encrust in this stocks of money instead of flows, and it increasingly becomes impossible to reflow that the other direction. The third one would be mass incarceration. That this country cannot continue to put 1 out of every 6 black males in prison by the time they're 30 and then expect them to be able to come out and get jobs and raise healthy families and communities and be upwardly mobile. That because we've thrown away the key on so many people for so long, we wasted so much human potential, we have created downward cycles of poverty in large swaths of our communities. And it's not like we're not spending enough money in our black and brown communities. We are. We're spending it on the wrong things. We spend it on surveilling and policing and criminalizing behaviors that otherwise are normal. And then we put them into a criminal justice system that significantly is informed, the outcomes are informed by how much money you have or the color of your skin. And so that is unjust, it's immoral, and it is one of the biggest drivers of inequality in this country. And lastly, this country needs to I thought you were going to say the last time this amount of inequality existed was the late 1800s. And something correlated to that to now, which is that we have completely neglected enforcing antitrust law in this country. Today, you are going to fly on 80% of your flights are on one of 3 airlines. Service sucks. You know, that 99% of your drugs are bought from 2 drugstores. This industry feels it.
Yeah.
Franchisees get squeezed by franchisors because only 2 or 3 companies are worth developing with, and have obscenely unequal market power.
Right.
And so when relationships in a market become so one-sided, consumers and workers lose.
This scares me in generally, existentially speaking, about where we're headed as a nation, where you're seeing all these oligopolies starting to form.
And so we need to recommit ourselves
Right.
to busting these up. And that is not going to happen with the people that created this problem, because they are beholden to the corporate PAC and corporate interests that fund their campaigns.
Yeah, but here's the thing. And it's Wall Street. The money is flowing, and they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to try to create value, and they're doing that through consolidation. So, how do you fight that argument that comes from the typically Republican side?
So certainly, first off, the Friedman-esque concept of a corporation's fiduciary duty is to the shareholders and to maximize profit is a very new reading of what a corporation is supposed to be. That even back to Henry Ford and what a corporation does. Corporation grants you limited liability and perpetual life in exchange for a specific charter. You have to take into account other stakeholders and the longevity of your corporation, because what is a shareholder? Is it the one-day shareholder? Is it the 20-year holder?
Right.
Is it the speculator? There's not even a single shareholder you can optimize for. It doesn't even make any sense as an argument.
Right. That's
And
interesting.
so that's something you should always pierce when someone tells you that. Always push back on them. The other thing I would say is you have to, as a regulator, the negative externalities, the negative effects of oligopoly and monopoly in the long run are detrimental to the public good. And therefore, it matters not if it makes business sense for Delta and Northwest to merge, or American Airlines and U.S. Air to merge. If consumers and the long run economy are going to pay for this through bad service, which we have, higher costs, which we get, then worse wages, which we've seen, then I don't think it is in the nation's interest to approve said mergers. But the pendulum has swung way too far in the direction of approving literally everything. And anyone that knows, if you're happy with Time Warner or Con Edison or any other large monopoly, then I'll be in shock.
Right. Yeah. I'm not happy with
I know.
any of those
Neither of
companies that you mentioned.
And you know what? I can extend that to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party.
Right.
Same thing. I have a duopoly of two vested legacy companies, corporations, or whatever you want to call them, entities.
Yeah, absolutely.
That have only the incentive to perpetuate their system and one another.
Right.
That because of that, ballot access for independence is nearly impossible in almost any state. Because of that, it's impossible to break through. It's hard to get on ballots in a Democratic city, in a Democratic Party ticket, because they don't want competition from within.
Right, and even so, using the Democrat side, say there's an independent candidate that leans more towards a lot of the belief structure that's put out on that party's platform. They're not going to want, and they're going to try to thwart that independent from running because it could take votes from their side.
I'm of the belief that more competition always leads to better outcomes, more innovation, and nobody in Congress, nobody in business, no one should ever be unchallenged.
Right. That makes sense. So what about when it comes to AAHOA and advocacy on Capitol Hill? How have you seen that develop over time, and how do you see you fitting into that equation before and then after the election?
So AAHOA has done a lot. Has become very professionalized over the last 10 years compared to what it was in the past, and is having massive outcomes, to show for their membership, and so that's great. Look, as a member of Congress, I will, I'm not going to be sold to any single interest group, even though I understand hotels.
Right.
But I do think that there's, an element of hospitality that's really special to me, and to all of us, is this concept generally that, like, in hospitality, we don't build walls. We build bigger tables. We welcome people. That the way that we operate our businesses, it is like a family.
Right. And you're actually speaking literally, because I feel like every hotel has a giant communal table
That's
now.
That's right. We all do massive tables.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you don't see too many fences or walls.
Right.
Taking that attitude into Washington, I think, is something that could be refreshing and healthy. Just down the street here.
Excellent. So before we wrap up here, anything else that you feel like you want to share today?
No, I mean, I want to thank you for allowing me to come on the show again. I had a great time the first time. Actually, we were just nascent campaign then. I had to do this out of my bedroom back then, guys.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Literally did it out of
I
my
really
bedroom.
got to see the inner workings of your campaign.
That's right. And it was like, what is this kid thinking? Well, here we are, 15 employees and 46 interns later, growing like wildfire. And I encourage your listeners to look us up at surajpatel.nyc. That's surajpatel.nyc.
That's Suraj.
Patel.nyc. And June 26th is our election day. If you know anyone in New York, spread the word.
Right.
If you have any extra coin you want to contribute, we'd love it. We'd welcome it because this does take money.
Yeah, of course. You got 15 staff.
Exactly.
And
That's right. That's how we do this thing. And June 26th, that's our primary. Look us
Excellent.
up. Shoot us a note.
Well, I'm really excited. I'm really excited for you. And no matter how you think, politically, get into a conversation with Suraj. Have that open dialogue that we are so desperately craving in this country. I want to see everybody be successful. I love what you're doing, and I love that you're taking this chance. What a gutsy move to put yourself out there. I mean, it's pretty impressive that you're taking this challenge.
Yeah, look, I get sharpened by fights, so this is actually fantastic for me. I'm having a great time.
Yeah, see, I can never do that because anytime someone disagrees with me, I get all sad and weepy inside. And I've
grown a thick skin quickly.
Yeah. Do you ever have one of those circumstances where you go back to your room and go, oh, if I should have just said that to that guy, it would have been perfect?
I used to, but now I don't. I've realized I don't have a time machine, and usually I'm talking to another person in another room, so I just move on.
All right, excellent. So be sure to check out Suraj Patel. I want to thank all of you guys for being here today on the No Vacancy Podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed our video. Hopefully you're liking our podcast. If you haven't subscribed, easy enough. Just go to iTunes, go to Google Play, anywhere finer podcasts are available. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back next time.
Thank you.